Facilities that make this program possible are provided by the City of Highland Park. Programs are produced independently by members of the community. The City of Highland Park is not affiliated with the following program or the producers of public access programming and is not responsible for the content. The following program does not reflect the opinions of the City of Highland Park.
Hi, welcome to another edition of What's This Show For? FOR, Friends of Ron. I'm your host, Ron Levitsky. I think a lot of us have heard the Latin phrase, in vino veritas, the idea that in wine there is truth, that people who drink wine tend to be more honest, less inhibited than people who don't. But what about the whole idea of what's the truth about wine? What do we know about wine? And I think a lot of us think we know a lot about wine until we meet somebody who really knows a lot about wine, which we're doing today. A fascinating subject. We have with us a sommelier from nearby, from Lake Forest Sunset Foods, Pierre Asti. Pierre, welcome. I'm just delighted you can be on the show.
Ron, thank you very much for inviting me.
Believe me, it's my pleasure. And just to disclaimer, you're not related to the Asti Spamantis. It's just a...
If I only were, but no, I am not.
Okay, no relation at all.
Yeah.
Well, I ran into you at Sunset Foods, and I got to talking to you, and I was just fascinated. And I know so many people are interested about wine. Thought it'd be wonderful to have you on. So let's get right to it. What struck me first when we started talking as we prepared for the show is that you didn't have a lifelong interest in wine. It came kind of later in life, right?
That's correct, yes.
So before, just real quickly, before you were in the wine business, what did you do?
I was involved in the real estate and relocation business. I ultimately ran several relocation management companies in different parts of the country and made my way over to Chicago, at which point I was buying and selling, running a division of a company that bought and sold about 2,000 homes a year for the Abbott Laboratories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
And so then how did you get involved and interested in wine?
Well, I had been interested in wine for some time. Of course, when you're in college, you end up drinking, Mogan David or Boone's Farm and that sort of thing. But as my palate began to develop, I got interested in wine over in Detroit, and we talked about it and had a variety of different wines. But it wasn't until my son, my youngest son, in about 2002, gave me a packet of wine, or actually it was a winemaking kit that I started the long endeavor. Well, I put together and made the wine out of that kit, and it was the most gosh-awful stuff you'd ever want to taste. Actually, you would not want to taste it. But that got me started. My son got me over the hump, and I got started in pursuing wine more feverishly.
And then you told me that you went so far as to volunteer your time in a local vineyard.
Well, I did. Initially, I was volunteering some time in a vineyard, and then I started volunteering my time in some tasting rooms because I was getting more and more interested in wine. The interesting thing about the vineyard was that as time went on, I began to see a parallel between wine and people.
Yeah, and this is very interesting. There's sort of the romance of vineyards and vines, and there's a term called the weeping vines.
Okay.
What is that?
Well, there was a point in my life where I had gone from volunteering a couple days a weekend to a couple weeks a month, and I started volunteering my time during my vacations. And as I did, I was pruning vines, I was mowing grass, I was doing quite a number of different things. But as you prune a vine, as you clip it, there is some sap that comes out, and that sap, as it comes from the vine, that's called the vine weeping. And I just found it interesting because there was a point in my life that my wife had passed away, and the vineyard gave me sort of a reprieve from the hustle and bustle of buying and selling so many houses, and I began to understand that there are times when we get pruned, whether it's by happenstances of life or by God or whatever it might be. But when you're pruned, you end up weeping. And there are a number of other parallel factors that I've found also.
You had a wonderful quote when we were talking a few days ago. You said, the greater the struggle, the greater the character.
Yeah.
In wine and in people. And I actually interviewed a professor of ancient Greece who talked about the Greeks who had gone to Asia Minor, and they went up to the Caucasus, and they were the only Greeks who couldn't make wine, and they kept struggling, and finally they made some of the most wonderful wine there was because they kept at it and the effort and the sacrifice. So it's very, very true. Well, let's get to the idea of a sommelier. You make this leap, I mean, from just kind of doodling in the industry to becoming a sommelier. That's a huge leap. Yeah. What is a sommelier? Well,
in the old days, 1,000 years ago, a sommelier was an expert in wine and tobacco. And as time has evolved, we found that they became more specialized. And so a sommelier is an individual that knows about wine. There are different levels of sommelier. The top sommelier, the Yoda of sommeliers, are what are called master sommeliers, and there's only about 200, 250 of those in the world.
Wow.
And then you have a whole a series of levels below that. In my level, there's only about 5,000 to 10,000 of me in the world. So becoming a sommelier is a somewhat rigorous endeavor. Becoming a master, it takes years and for some decades to become a master. But there's an education process, there's a tasting process. You can become a sommelier, or you can become an expert on your own.
So you're saying there's an academic program that you can enter with actual courses to teach you to be a sommelier?
Yes, there are. There are different paths an individual can take. One is an academic side, and that academic side can be purely academic. The direction I took was both academic and tasting. And then there's also one in which it's all tasting and you're learning your information by yourself and on your own.
Do you think that that anybody who wanted to apply himself or herself could become like a tasting sommelier? Do you think there has to be a natural gift as well, or talent?
I believe anybody, and I would encourage people who, whether you're young or old, I would encourage people to take the next step and find out a little bit more as to how to become a sommelier. But yes, I think that there are different gifts that are available, different ways people can approach it. One of my favorite stories is there was a young man. I remember I was at the Orange Bowl in Miami. I grew up in Miami. And I saw a young man walk out onto the field. His name was Chuck Foreman. And when I saw him walk onto the field, I said, that guy is going to be a professional football player. It's by the way he carried himself, just some natural instincts as he played. Now, there are a lot of people that make the National Football League, but there are very few that have just that natural, innate ability or gift. Same thing with a sommelier, or any walk of life. A sommelier, the masters, it is a gift in this. You can grind it out and you can become a sommelier without the gift. Mm-hmm. You can become the master without the gift. But those who are gifted, it appears to come more easily.
Well, it seems amazing to me, because I have no palate for anything, but when you told me the story of your final exam, that was a really intriguing one. Could you go over that real briefly?
Yes. As I was sitting for my final exam to become a sommelier, you take an academic, true and false, multiple choice, short answers, long answers, and then a thesis. And that's all within a 3 or 4 hour period of time. And then the very last thing you do is they ask you to step out of the room, and when they call you in, and you're supposed to go to your desk, and they have placed a glass of wine on the desk. and you're supposed to tell them what kind of wine it is, where in the world it's from, and well, let me just walk through on my particular situation. I walked into the room and I looked at that glass on the table and I said, you better be a Pinot Noir because you look like a Pinot Noir. And as I walked over, I sat down and I smelled the wine to see what kind of nose it had, and picked up a number of characteristics, and it was confirming to me that it was a Pinot Noir. But once you taste it, then that's the total affirmation. I tasted it, and it was a Pinot Noir. Now, in addition to saying that it was a Pinot Noir, then you have to make a determination, where is it from? Is it from the old world or from the new world? If it's from the old world.
Old world meaning?
Old world, usually the continent, the European continent.
Okay.
And now some will also say that the old world will include the up through the Tigris-Euphrates River Valley, including Turkey, Syria, etc. But generally we think in terms of the old world as being the European continent. And so you have to say, is it from the old world or from the new world? New world is everything other than the European continent. And I made the determination based on the taste profile, the subtleness of it, that it came from the old world. And then I had to make a determination, it's from the old world, where in the old world? I made the determination it was from France. Where in France? Well, I believed it was along the Loire River Valley. Now, the Loire River Valley is divided into 3 sections, actually 4. But I just made the determination that based on the taste profile and a relatively good educated guess, it was a Pinot Noir from the upper valley, also known as the central vineyards. And that was the way I made my determination, and I was fortunate. I was lucky. I was right.
Well, I'm sure it was more than luck. But now, what would a master sommelier have been able to tell that you didn't?
A master sommelier, there are so many different nuances, but generally a master would, in many cases, be able to tell you what vineyard it came from and who the enologist or the winemaker may have been. So wow. They can ratchet it down in tremendous detail.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about your work. Well, first of all, sommelier, when you become a sommelier like you did, what are some job opportunities that sommeliers have?
There are quite a number. Now, in the wine business, there are, by state law in Illinois, you can serve wine on premise in a restaurant or off premise in wine shops, grocery stores, and things like that. So a sommelier can be employed by any number of restaurants, whether they're restaurant chains or just independent restaurants. You can be hired by grocery stores, wine shops. There are sommeliers that are part of wine distributors that will help a distributor in determining the better taste profiles of what the wine tastes like, so that they can put copy on marketing material and that sort of thing. So sommeliers can be involved in the business in all kinds of ways.
Okay, and so you're working for Sunset Foods, but for the Lake Forest.
Right.
Sunset Foods. And you told me that you're the first sommelier that Sunset Foods has hired.
That's correct.
And so is there any significance to you working in Lake Forest, or what does the company want you to do?
Well, I think the important thing about Lake Forest is we've got a clientele that these people, most of our customers, travel the world. They are accustomed to excellent, beautiful, luscious, savory wines from all over the world. And the difference between most grocery chains or grocery stores is that they'll buy wines because the distributors got wines to sell. What we do at Sunset Lake Forest and at the Sunsets at large is we make a determination that these are the kinds of wines we want for our clientele. and they're not necessarily grocery store wines. They're beautiful wines that will meet the needs and expectations of our clientele. And my specialty is buying the best wines in the world for $15 and under, or buying the best wines in the world from $15 all the way up to $500.
Wow. Well, you brought a lot of wines here, and in our limited time, we want to take advantage of you being here. Can we compare? Can you a couple of these wines?
One of the things that's important is we look at different wines.
Yeah.
For instance, I'm bringing 2 Chardonnays. I've brought 2 Chardonnays. Some of them, one of them you may be familiar with, others you may not, as far as all the wines we have. But when it comes to a Chardonnay, these are modestly priced Chardonnays, and they have a different taste profile. The Chamisol, is a clean, crisp Chardonnay, while the Deloche makes 3 or 4 different levels. Anywhere this one happens to be on sale right now for $9.99.
Pretty inexpensive.
Pretty inexpensive. It's an excellent wine. Now, however, Deloche also makes beautiful wines that run all the way up to $75 and $80 a bottle. So, but the taste profiles on these happen to be that you've got a clean, crisp Chardonnay and a slightly oaky or buttery Chardonnay.
So the idea is that just because it says Chardonnay doesn't mean that all the Chardonnays are going to taste alike.
That's right. And the reason they taste different, there's a variety of reasons. I don't want to get too geeky on you all, but one of the reasons is where does the Chardonnay come from, or where does the grape come from? I compare grapes, like a Chardonnay grape coming from one part of the world and a Chardonnay grape coming from another part of the world. They're going to taste different. It's like tasting a Granny Smith apple. If I tasted a Granny Smith apple from Michigan, it will taste very similar to a Granny Smith apple from Washington State. But if you're tasting them side by side, you can taste the difference. They have the same basic properties, but there's a difference, and there's the same thing with a Chardonnay. So it's where is it from? What does the winemaker do to make it, to put their thumbprint? That's how a master sommelier can tell who made the wine. Is each winemaker has a way that they do wine, how they produce wine, how they make wine, how they love the wine, and create something that is a reflection of them. So it's what's happening in the vineyard, it's what's happening in the winery, and it's based on what's going on with the grape itself.
Okay. Can we take a look at a couple others?
Yes. Now, for instance, if people are interested in eating, let's say, seafood, or shellfish, lobsters, shrimp, there are times where what we have a tendency to do is say, well, let me go with the Chardonnay. Let me go with the Sauvignon Blanc. One of the things you probably ought to consider is something that not too many people are familiar with, is a Gruner Veltliner. That comes from Austria, and one of the telltale ways of seeing that it's from Austria is on the very tip of the bottle. You'll see that that's one of the basic insignias that it's an Austrian wine. It's a red top with a white stripe through it. But if you're looking for a beautiful wine to go with any kind of shellfish or fish, a Gruner would be a great.
Now we're on the topic of shellfish. You told me a fascinating story about a customer coming in, wanting to buy a wine, and you said, "What are you making?" And she said, "Some kind of a pasta dish." And then you said, "Well, what kind of sauce?" She said, "Well, I have some crustaceans in the sauce." And what did you tell her?
Well, you know, the thing is, people have a tendency to say, "Well, I'm having pasta," and so they want to have a Chianti because pasta's Italian, and while pasta is Italian, the thing is it's the sauces and all the ingredients that go together to help you make a determination as to what you should be drinking or what would go well with it. If you love Cabernets, then drink Cabernets all the time. If you love Chardonnays, drink Chardonnays all the time. But if you're wanting to amplify and pair well and enjoy the food as much as you can, then drink a wine that goes well with the food. And a general rule of thumb is that if a particular product, be it beef or shellfish, if it grows in a particular area, then you should be drinking wine that comes from that same area. Again, general rule of thumb. Not always spot on, but...
But didn't you tell her also that because she had crustaceans in the sauce that you needed a more flinty or more with mineral or something?
There's a little bit more minerality to a couple of different wines. The Gruner is one. Now, an American Sauvignon Blanc will have a little bit more minerality to it, and there's actually one by both Winty and, excuse me, a couple of other Dry Creek that have a little bit more flint to their taste. Now, we think flint, and we think, oh, that would be horrible. I mean, that's like licking a pencil lead. No, it's not. But there's just a nuance that is almost indistinguishable, that as you pair that with the crustacean, then it amplifies the taste of both.
So you're really, besides buying wine, looking for specific wines that are quality wines that are relatively inexpensive in some cases, you're also educating the consumer, right? The customer comes in and I'm going to be cooking this for a party, and what would you suggest? So there's a lot of pairing, right?
Yeah.
So do you get more people coming in and saying, I want to pair the wine with my food or my food with my wine?
Well, when I do some training with people in restaurants and in different places, and that's one of the first questions. It's a very difficult thing you don't necessarily always lead with it, but there are two things that people, the wait staff, want to try to make a determination on, whether they ask the question directly or whether they, in conversations that they're hearing around the table as you're talking about wines, the fundamental question is, do you want the food to go with your wine, or do you want the wine to go with your food? If somebody, as I mentioned a minute ago, if somebody just loves Cabernet and you know, you're sitting there as wait staff and say, you love Cabernet, and they'll say, I don't drink anything but Cabernet, then automatically what the wait staff needs to do is think, what do I have on the menu that will pair best with the Cabernets that we have? Now, if the individual says, I want to have chicken marsala with my Cabernet, you know, that's fine. The wait staff might suggest that there would be something better to pair with it, but it's purely up to the customer what they want. So do you pair the wine with the food or the food with the wine?
And also, I had gone by a wine shop that had an advertisement for pairing wine and chocolate. And I thought, is that for real? But when we talked earlier, you said it is for real.
Oh, yeah. Not only is it for real, but there are two basic wines or two basic products that go extremely well with chocolate. Number one is port, and number two is Cabernet. Merlots actually go well and pair well. Actually, a lot of the big, bold red wines will pair well with chocolate. It depends on the level of chocolate you have in it, or cocoa that you have in it. But what I typically will do is I'll have people sit down and we'll be drinking, whether it's a port, a ruby port, or a tawny port, or a cab. We'll sit down and I'll ask them to taste it. And they'll taste it, and we talk about the taste profile and the flavors that you're experiencing and that sort of thing. And when you ask people about that, typically they have not thought about it. But when you ask them one-on-one or in small groups what they're tasting, they begin to understand, well, there is an interesting flavor here. And so you taste it, and then you ask them to taste the piece of chocolate. And after they've had a minute to taste the chocolate, now you ask them to taste the wine again. And it's as if they are drinking a completely different glass of wine. It pairs so well. It creates the sweetness of the chocolate diminishes the big bold tannins that are sometimes in a red cab. Likewise, the tannins that are in the cab cause the sweetness of of the chocolate not to be so sweet.
Okay. Because of the time, that's it. Really interesting. You brought this, and we got to talk about this. So a lot of things go into the wine, the soil, the slope of the hill, and so forth. And what is this?
Well, these are galets.
Galets.
This is from southern France, and in the Rhone River Valley, actually in an area of the Rhone River Valley called Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Now, it happens to be that my favorite wine is Châteauneuf-du-Pape. This is the soil in Châteauneuf-du-Pape. There are hundreds of acres of this, and when the glaciers came down thousands of years ago, they deposited these kinds of rocks. They tumbled along the European continent, and they settled in southern France, and in actually the area along the Rhone River Valley. And the interesting thing about this is the wines of Châteauneuf-du-Pape, you will always find one of the top 10 wines of the world, rated in the world, is a Châteauneuf-du-Pape. Now, what do these galets do? There are several things. The soil or the land is deep with these, and the vines are actually growing and struggling to get to the water. The greater the struggle, the greater the character. So they're struggling to get down to get to the water. And so during the day, these galets heat up. And at night, in this section of France, it gets very cool. Well, the heat that's generated back up to the leaves and to the grapes create such a unique, different taste and flavor profile that Châteauneuf, the wines of Châteauneuf are the most unique in the world. So you've got, besides the galets, the soil, then you also have along the Rhone River Valley what's called the Mistral winds. The Mistral winds are like hurricane force winds that every afternoon they blow up. They blow from the Mediterranean Sea all the way up the Rhone River Valley and create a different atmosphere. So something very unique happens in Châteauneuf. You've got the galets, you've got the Mistral winds, you've got so many things that happen that create just an unbelievable wine. And I mean, I know master sommeliers that they study more the soil and the weather than they do the grape, because they're so enamored with and the soil, the weather, the climate, and all that is called, and the slope of the hill that the grapevines are growing on. That's called the terroir. And so there are a lot of factors that enter into what makes the grape, what makes that particular grape so unique and so good, and so that it's part of the terroir.
Amazing that people like you can taste the wine related to the grape, related to the geography of the specific area. That's just amazing. We only have about a minute or so left. The time has gone by so quickly. So give us a couple of tips about drinking wine, either pairing or what's a good wine. Just one or two tips.
Well, I think the first and foremost is I only drink good wines with somebody or by myself. So those are the only two times that it's proper and right to drink good wine. But I think generally speaking, one of the things that is important to note is that people are not sure when they go to a restaurant. They're not sure, do I order a red wine? Do I order a white wine? What kind of wine do I order? General rule of thumb is the darker the meat, the darker the wine. The lighter the food you're eating, the lighter the wine. So if you do that, for instance, if you're doing a lamb, you might do a Pinot Noir, or you might do a Tempranillo, something from Rioja.
Thanks, Pierre. I got to have you back. We got so many more bottles to go through. Hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Learned so much. Thanks for watching, Pierre. Pierre Asti from Lake Forest Sunset Foods. Thank you so much. See you next time.